Good, happy Wednesday, everyone. The day after Halloween, November 1st. Greg Cosell of NFL Films and ESPN's NFL Matchup. This thing just keeps racing by. And for week 9, we have a packed slate of games. I have all kinds of notes here: A flat, B sharp, D suspended for the Pete Townsend chord. So I've got all my notes there, everything on my guitars. And we're going to skip the trade deadline stuff because that's more speculation. The Josh McDaniels firing, I mean, those are all obviously pertinent issues, but we have so many great games to get to, and that's really kind of what we do. So I want to start there. And I'd like to start with Thursday night's game, Titans at Steelers. And oh boy, Will Levis. Really interesting stat I discovered from this game. Levis was throwing either checkdowns or bombs, very little in between. 7 passes of 20 or more air yards, 8 of 0 or fewer air yards. His
Right.
3 touchdowns of at least 50 air yards is the most for any NFL quarterback since at least 2016. And my real quick notes against the Falcons, then I'll turn it over to you. Clearly comfortable with the Titans' offensive structure with backfield deception, run looks to explosive passing plays, and zone reads. RPOs, I don't know, but he would read the defender and sort of make his decision there. Times when he should have taken the profit instead of going rogue, he blew two third down opportunities that way. But he's got a golden hammer for an arm. We all knew this. When he could set and throw, and there were some really nice protection designs, they were getting some of those explosive plays out of heavy personnel where they'd leave the extra guys in to keep them comfortable. And I'll just say, if he's able to keep it together against a much better defense than the Steelers on Thursday night, and he will start, Vrabel's already said, I think you rock with the randomness. I think you make him your guy. You're 3-4. You've been in offensive purgatory for years. I think it's time to ride the Tiger, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're not going to get those long completions every single week. So I think we need to understand that. And I think as teams get a better feel for him as he plays more, I was actually pretty intrigued by this game because normally the Falcons this season, they've been really, really good with their disguise, with their late rotation. They still did some of that. Obviously, if you're throwing over the top of it, it doesn't necessarily have the same impact as if you're throwing into it.
Yeah. If you're 20 yards past the safeties, it really doesn't matter how they flip.
No, that's a good point. Play action was a defined foundation of the Titans' pass game. 16 of his 32 dropbacks had play action. Half had him under center, half had him in the gun. He was very good with play action. So that's something I would expect to see more of. I would expect to see more shot plays because shot plays normally have max pro, either 6 or 7 man protection. I think, the one thing that will show up with Levis, and it didn't show up that much in this game, but it will, and it showed up when you watched him in college as well, was I think that he can have ball placement concerns at times. And even in this game, there were some throws, some completions where the ball placement was not as precise as it needed to be.
I did a lot of tape piece, and there were a few he's going to want back. But yeah. I mean, for a start, that's okay.
Oh no! But I think that's something that we saw in college as well. That's not just something that showed up in the game on Sunday. But I think the one thing that did show up is this offense looked different. They were more vertically threatening. The ball went down the field. Now, whether that was purely design or whether he's going to take those throws, whereas Tannehill would not, that we don't know the answer to that without knowing what's in the head of the quarterbacks. But there's no question that Levis is an aggressive mindset thrower of the football. And if he feels that he has a vertical shot available, he will take it. And actually, he would have had a bigger game because Akwenko dropped what was a beautifully designed play. I love the design of the play. And I was so sad when I saw him drop it because I thought to myself, God, if they win a few games, that's a film piece for my matchup show. But he dropped it. But they did some interesting things. And I think the Thursday night game will be fascinating because obviously you've got 2 tackles for the Titans that are not necessarily high-level pass protectors, and now they're facing Watt and Highsmith, and it'll be intriguing to see how they choose to protect.
I've heard, I don't know what Cam Hayward said. I think he's like on the verge of being released from IR, and there's a waiting period. I don't know what that is, but that would obviously help their defense. I wanted to get into Joey Porter Jr. has seen his snaps grow exponentially in the last 2 games. This is one reason that Levis might not want to hurl it deep. He's allowed 3 catches on 14 targets for 32 yards, 6 yards after the catch, no touchdowns, 1 interception, 2 pass breakups, and an opponent pass rating of 9.8, which is pretty good. Legitimate island corner with the aggressiveness and short area quickness the Steelers are obviously hoping to add to their defense. When he does get beaten, and I don't want to say boomer bust, but he was so reliant on his, outlier traits. But when he does get beaten, from what I've seen, Greg, he doesn't get beat like horrifically beaten where you're going, he's 20 yards out of the picture. Like, what is he doing? So he doesn't get horrifically beaten. He doesn't get beaten a lot. I think it's a big addition to their defense.
Yeah, I mean, he's a rookie, so we don't have a large enough sample size in the league. We know
He's
what
been
his
a
traits
starter
are.
for the last 2 games, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we know what we saw at Penn State, and he's certainly big. He's athletic. He's got ridiculously long arms. He can run. He has every trait you would want in an outside corner. But we'll see. Again, I think there was no question, Doug, that he was going to become the starter at some point this season. This is a secondary that is not a high-level secondary by NFL standards in terms of what they put out at corner. So you knew he was going to start getting meaningful snaps and start. So it'll be interesting. DeAndre Hopkins obviously came to life last week with Levis. But you and I both know you're not going to hit 50-yard touchdowns. There were not a couple of those. Although I thought the shorter touchdown in the high red zone was a beautifully schemed play. Another play that I thought, wow, I could do that on the matchup show. I loved the whole concept there, beautifully designed. But yeah, the long touchdowns, you have to be careful. No matter how big his arm is, and it's big, and I'm not saying they're not going to take their shots, and he may hit another one or two. That may happen. I don't want to act as if it will never happen, but I don't think you can count on those every single week.
Well, the stat I just said from Next Gen Stats about 3 touchdowns and 50 or more air yards, the most since 2016. Let's not make the outlier the norm. That's
right. So you just have to be careful. I mean, it was a great opening performance. The thing that actually stood out to me more than anything, given their O-line this year, and I see Tennessee every single week, is he was protected. And again, that had to do some with their protection schemes. This is a team that's going to need to rely on 6-man protection concepts more than 5-man protection concepts, because if they rely on 5-man, they're going to have some issues.
Yeah. Well, they started off, I think the first 3 passes were short, and then he get him in a rhythm, and then he started bombs away. But I noticed that not only would they, with 2 tight ends, they'd leave 1 tight end in. Henry and Spears, the running backs, also helped with protection. So
they need to do that. They
protection really well.
They had benched Dillard, and then the right tackle Hubbard got hurt, so they moved Petit Frere, who had started at left tackle in place of Dillard. They then moved Petit Frere back to right tackle, and Dillard came in at left tackle, and in this particular game held his own.
Yeah. I feel like I could talk about each of these games for half an hour, but we can't do that because you got to go narrate NFL matchups. So let's
That
get
is correct.
Dolphins at Chiefs in Frankfurt, Germany. Want to give you a few quick numbers here. We've talked about Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense with 2 and 3 tight ends and how good it is. There is a very specific delineation. Patrick Mahomes with 2 tight ends on throws of 0 to 19 air yards this season, a league-high passer rating of 133.8. Mahomes 2 tight ends on throws of 20 or more air yards, a passer rating of 15.6. Mahomes with 3 tight ends on 0 to 19 air yard throws, 94.2 passer rating. 3 tight ends on throws of 20 or more air yards. He has not completed a pass, 39.6. Overall on throws of 20 or more air yards, 10 of 32 for 351, 1 touchdown, 5 interceptions, a league-high 8 turnover-worthy throws. And you don't know what that stat means until you watch the tape. Then it becomes clear that that's legit. And a passer rating of 44.7. The Chiefs aren't using motion. This is just my take. They're not using motion to disrupt in the passing game as much as I'd like to see. They'll move guys around pre-snap, but you don't see a lot of defensive disadvantage out of it. A lot of straight vertical routes and some combos. But his current receivers don't seem especially adept at separating with speed. They're not separation generators, as you like to say. They're formation diverse, but not in ways that really amplify the skills of their receivers, such as they are. So I guess it's not like Mahomes' arm just fell off. That's not the problem. But when you have an iffy group of receivers and you don't have those separation generators outside of Kelsey, how do you make the best of it? Trade deadline's over. They got who they got.
Well, then it becomes scheme. But
Yeah.
it's funny you talk about 20 air yards. The entire league offensively is way down in terms of explosive pass plays,
Mhm.
which is a whole different conversation you could
Right.
probably talk about for an hour. But the whole
We're going
league
to
is
lead with
down.
it soon because it's a definite trend.
Yeah, I mean it's and again there's statistics you can look at that are reflective of that. Those statistics don't necessarily say what the reason is, and that's a different discussion. And I think that's the discussion you have to have at some point is why do we think that's the case? Not just look at the numbers, which are representative of the fact that it's true, but they don't give you the reasons. It's the discussion of analytics versus process. The analytics is results based. They tell you what the results are, but they don't speak to the process.
So for the process, you go to the tape, and that tells you more.
Right, right. So, anyway, but getting back to Mahomes, obviously he's coming off a bad game. Um, I would expect their offense. I would expect Andy Reid this week, particularly against a Dolphins defense. And I watched them this week because I was curious to see how they used Jalen Ramsey, and they
Mhm.
essentially played zone a large percentage of the game. Jalen Ramsey did not line up in press man on one snap in the entire game against the Patriots.
Which I
So
think is the best way to play him at this point in his career. I think he's a better off guy.
I think he's really really good as a zone defender. I think he probably studies hard. He has a really innate feel for route concepts and combinations, when to pass off, when not to. I think he's a terrific zone defender. But the point I'm making is, given that the Chiefs will probably see a lot of zone, it would not surprise me to see, and we've seen this over the last 2-3 years at different times, Doug, as you know, Andy Reid going back to quick rhythm, quick timing pass game to get Patrick Mahomes back in a little bit of rhythm. And it would not surprise me to see that, since they're likely to face a lot of zone coverage.
And that's really what they had this problem in the first half of last season, and they started to hit it underneath over and over, just spam it underneath, and then guys
Yep.
are down, and then you're going to have something up top.
Right.
That's kind of what
Yeah, I
they
mean,
do.
there's two philosophies about the vertical game. Is that you can be aggressive and say, "Hey, we're going to force the vertical game by what we do with our deployment of personnel and our formations and our motions," or you can say, "Hey, we're going to get into the quick rhythm pass game, make you then have to respond to that." Human nature is you just kind of come up a little bit, because after a while getting beat by 7-8 yard completions does add up, and then all of a sudden then you attack vertically because of what you've done to the defense. So there's two different schools of thought. But I would not expect Patrick Mahomes to have a second bad game this week.
Well, he had the flu apparently, and only
Yeah, but
Michael.
one thing I learned from Ron Jaworski years ago is, all you can do is evaluate a guy when he's out there.
Right, of course.
I mean, he was not, again, we have no idea what was going on in his head, but the tape told you that he was not mentally sharp versus the Broncos. He was not taking throws that were there. He got stuck in the pocket. Then, of course, he leaves the pocket. We've seen him make unbelievable plays when he does leave the pocket. But in this particular game, those second reaction sandlot plays did not happen. So when they don't happen, it looks like he's just running around for no reason.
Yeah. I did, because of the trade deadline and other things I was doing. I did not have time to watch Miami's offense against the Patriots, and we talked last week about how atypical that offense looked. Did it look more like what it looks like against the Pats?
They struggled in the first half. I thought the Patriots had a good plan. They took away a lot of those first window throws. They did it in multiple ways. Of course, there's many ways you can do those kinds of things. I thought in the second half, they they had more plays that looked like the Dolphins. I mean, look, their pass game, when you get right down to it, their pass game is built on formations, motions, rhythmic timing throws off 3-step drop and quick 5-step drop. That's
Mhm.
what their pass game is built on. It's not a true drop back passing game the way we think of a drop back passing game. Tua does not work through progression reads in the way we think of progression reads. Their speed is such a big factor in everything they do.
Mhm. Well, it's not just the speed; it's how they set it up with those CFL motions. I call them the across
Right,
and
but I mean,
it's all that together.
The speed is a big deal
Yep.
in combination with the motion, because when you get those guys in motion screaming off the line of scrimmage with free access, that's a big deal.
I wanted to get into if I were to tell you, Dr. Greg Cosell, that there is a new best defense in the National Football League by DVOA,
I don't
which
even know what that means.
it's opponent adjusted efficiency
Okay.
from my buddy Aaron Schatz and those guys. So it's analytics that actually make sense to a lot of people. But so from that standard and others, which is the best defense in the NFL after week 8? Would you guess?
Are you asking me, who would be the best? Well, because I don't know exactly what that measures, I don't know if I could answer that question.
It's Baltimore Ravens.
It's funny. I was going to say that because I think they lead the NFL in sacks, and
Yeah.
they're a fascinating defense to watch because
Yes.
they're a scheme-based defense in terms of quarterback pressure, not
Yep.
an individual-based defense. They don't have great pass rushers, so therefore they have to scheme pressure, and they do a really, really good job of it.
Well, it's interesting because they played too high 65% of the time this season, which helps them to do all the stuff we're about to talk about. And this is Ravens Seahawks. Really interesting game on both. Like, wow.
2 first-place teams. Who would have thunk, huh?
Yeah, we're pretty happy up here in Seattle. Now, they don't, as you said, not one big-time pressure creator per se. They get it done with scheme pressures that work for a lot of defenders in a lot of different ways. Kyle Van Noy has 16 pressures. They move him to either edge and also as a stand-up 3-tech in their third down 5-man fronts and blitzes. He's a quick rusher who knows how to shoot gaps. Odafe Owe also has 16 pressures, primarily edge, but he'll also go on 3-tech stand-up looks and nose alignment at times. They use Jadeveon Clowney, who has 34 pressures, as a stunt player, exploiting his ability to move quickly over multiple gaps. Justin Madubuike, who I want to mention again, regarded
he's had a good year for them. They've used him on the edge at times as well.
8 of his 26 pressures have come from the edge or over the tackles. He's more the 300-pound guy who can do different things. And Michael Pierce is their primary interior rusher, and he is a hoss at 6'0", 340. Physically dominant player.
That 340 might be a little light.
Well, we're just going with what they tell us.
Right.
I'm not in the training room with the scale, but physically dominant player who will flash short area quickness, but his job is really to take a guy and just push him back, and he does that really well. Jim Harbaugh has talked about how opponent-specific Mike Macdonald's defense is, but what I really see is a lot of smart player deployment, getting his players to do what they do best based on their attributes and their skill sets. And as we've both said, this is as much about scheming it up as getting the guys in process.
Yeah, I mean, until Owe came back, he missed a number of games. If I said to you that, hey, we have a team leading the NFL in sacks and their 2 edge rushers are Clowney and Van Noy, you'd kind of go, what? But they scheme it exceptionally well. They do a great job. You talk about being opponent specific. Their defensive staff must, and I say this based on tape study, must do an unbelievably good job understanding opponents' protections, because they do such a good job of attacking them and breaking them down, and they get people clean to the quarterback, which is rare in this league. I mean, I remember when I did the book with Jaworski and had a great conversation with Dick LeBeau, who's, considered, he's not the pioneer of the zone blitz, but he was considered sort of the master of it for years and years.
David
He said,
Fulcher,
hey,
baby.
What's that?
David Fulcher, baby.
Yeah, that's right. But I mean, he said to me, hey, it's very hard to get people clean. What you're trying to do is get a great matchup. You're trying to get a really good pass rusher against a running back, that kind of thing. But the Ravens have gotten people clean, and they do a really, really good job of it. I love the way they use Queen and Smith in their nickel fronts. Smith in particular, he's become a big factor in the way they use him. Not necessarily getting sacks, but just the way he's involved in dictating protections, and then they're able to attack and break down protections. So I think that Mike Macdonald has done an unbelievably good job with all of that. And, now that Owe's back, he certainly has the traits to develop into a big-time pass rusher. We'll see if that happens, but he certainly has the traits.
Well, I remember scouting Dax Hill and David Ojabo, who's actually played a little bit. Loved him before he got hurt, and watching Michigan's defense under McDonald that 1 year and thinking, boy, this is really cool.
They were doing a lot of NFL stuff. I remember
Yeah, they
Dax
were.
Hill had a sack. I believe it was against Wisconsin because I think it was Graham Mertz was the quarterback then. He's at
Yeah.
Florida now, obviously. And that was a classic NFL pressure scheme, the kind you don't see in college very often. And I remember thinking, boy, that's really good stuff. And it was Mike McDonald, of course, then,
Yep.
and now he's back with the Ravens.
And I think maybe what I haven't talked to Harbaugh about this. I mean, like opponent specific, I think they're really situationally specific. And I saw that at Michigan. Like, we're going
That's
to
a good
do
point.
maybe one of three things on third down. Maybe this is our first down look. Here's where we do fake mugs. He's just got those guys so aligned. And I just wanted to bring up his Michigan defensive concepts because it really stood out. I'm like, I thought myself, this is a really advanced, this is an NFL defense playing in college. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and you know, I think they're using Kyle Hamilton really effectively. I think they use Arthur Merlette really effectively
Yep.
in some of their blitz concepts. So, you know, it's again, if you said before the season that one of their starting outside corners was going to be Brandon Stevens, who's played pretty much all season long at outside corner, some might say, "Ooh, that's going to be a problem." It's not turned out to be a problem, not through the first 8 weeks of the NFL season.
Well, they have that 65% too high sort of
Yep.
protection to give you.
Yeah, a lot of shell coverage. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
not heavy blitz, heavy different
You
pressures.
know, I
And
think one of the things that stood out, just trendy, you know,
yeah,
talking about trends, I should say, not trendy, trends in the NFL, you know, yeah, for years and years, people automatically assumed, oh, you blitz, you play man, or you blitz, you have to play single high. I think one thing that we've seen more and more in this league, and it just shows you how smart coaches are and how the game's constantly evolving. And we can get in at some point to what I see offensively, not today, but we can think
yeah.
about this for future conversations. But you know, I think one of the things that's really evolved is the ability of defensive coordinators to pressure out of shell coverage looks.
You
And
want
I
you
think
have
that
otherwise you're going to get your ass kicked.
yeah,
There's
no, but I mean, you
yeah,
know, for years and years that wasn't the case. You
right.
know, it's the evolution of thinking and of the game.
Sure.
And I think that's something that the Ravens do really well, but other teams are doing the same kinds of things.
Yes. Well, here's another team, another defense that doesn't blitz a lot of stunts. And I want to get into the Seahawks defense, which we talked about a little bit. We talked about Baltimore's offense and Seattle's offense. I want to get into Seattle's defense with the addition of Leonard Williams. Seahawks have only blitzed 67 times this season. They've stunned it 112 times. And the addition of Williams makes that really interesting. Pete Carroll said that he views Williams as an ideal three tech for his defense. But and he also had some pretty evil TT stunts with Williams as a looper and Dexter Lawrence as the
Yeah,
penetrator.
they did that with the Giants. They mixed and matched. You know, Williams was both a penetrator and a looper. You
Yeah.
know, he has a lot of experience doing that from the inside.
Now the Seahawks do not have a Dexter Lawrence because nobody else does, but they do have dynamic interior guys that Williams could really crank this up. There are also more times you'd think where Lawrence and Williams is on the field, and it wasn't like Lawrence was double teamed all the time. They would have to handle Williams too, and I think he will see more of that in these fronts. But he's a good player, and that I'm looking at their young edge rushers. Derek Hall had that speed to power at Auburn. That's showing up. Boye Mafe has expanded his pallets of moves. Really has a nice inside counter. And Darrell Taylor, I mean, talk about your freak athletes. He's still putting it together mechanically, but when he's on, watch
Yeah,
him. His
he's
speed in the pocket is
yeah,
ridiculous.
coming out of Tennessee, I really thought he'd have a chance to be an excellent NFL pass rusher because he's long, he's athletic, he's flexible, he can bend, he can close to the quarterback, he can flatten his rush path. But yeah, they're an interesting team. I mean, they basically play 4-2 nickel with Brooks and Wagner as the backers.
Yep.
Then they mix and match with what they want to do. I mean, we've seen them play Witherspoon at left corner. We've seen them kick Witherspoon inside as the
Yep.
slot corner. You know, when he plays left corner outside, they play Adams as the slot. When he kicks inside, you know, they take Love out and they essentially play Adams. So, you know, they have different combinations of what they do in the secondary. You know, they play a decent amount of cover one.
Yep.
So, you know, they're an interesting defense. You know, I think they have a lot of pieces that are they can move around and function with, and you know, I'm sure Pete loves that.
Yeah, they're starting to ratchet up. And Witherspoon barely played any slot in college, and he's really
No, he
done
did not play in the slot in college.
like 3 snaps or something. And
Yeah.
he actually looked really good on one of them. So this is two fronts specifically that really know how to mess with your protections. Charles Cross is back, Seattle's left tackle. Abe Lucas, right tackle. I don't know. 41-year-old Jason Peters actually looked decent in run blocking. Hasn't played all year, and he's 41. Pass pro was a little weird, so you'd expect that. But yeah, fascinating game there. Running through these games at lightning speed because there are so many. Cowboys and Eagles.
That's a pretty big game, Cowboys
Yeah,
Eagles. I think a few people might be interested in that one.
I'm gonna let because I know you do Eagle Eye in the Sky with Fran Duffy, so I kind of lean on you, especially when I'm pressed for time to study tape. I will say you mentioned on Eagle Eye that this was a real big Jalen Hurts
Well, that's the
pass.
way they chose to play it. They didn't run the ball very much at all through much of the game. So they obviously, against this particular opponent, the Commanders, they felt they could throw the ball and work against their secondary. So that's the way they came out. And obviously they did that well.
Well, Commanders like to bust coverage a lot, so I guess that
Yeah,
works.
we'll see what happens against the Cowboys. Cowboys play an incredibly high percentage of man coverage. They are incredibly multiple with their front looks. They have tremendous
Oh,
depth along their defensive line.
they stun
They'll
as much as any team in the league, and they are so good at it.
Yes, and they line up with five across a
Yep.
lot. They move Micah Parsons around. They look for matchups with him. They'll match him up on the center. Sometimes watching him when he's working against the center, I feel like I'm watching Allen Iverson with a crossover. He's just so quick. Yeah. I mean, it's so they're difficult up front, and they play fast. The entire defense plays fast. So we'll see. This is a team that plays a ton of nickel, big nickel, conventional nickel. Depending on how they want to match up in a given week. So this will be intriguing. The one thing I will say is, Hurts last week, I thought he played really well, by the way, but you could tell there were times his knee was bothering him. And
Yeah.
again, he has another week now
Did
of
that happen in
treatment.
the game, or was it like
I
during the
think it
week?
happened the week prior, I
Oh,
think.
okay.
So I don't know what the injury is. They don't have to announce the injury specifically.
Right.
So again, I don't know where he stands with that, but there were times that it was evident on film that his knee was bothering him. He had a couple of runs, but he didn't run as much. This is a front that will get after him. They'll get bodies around the quarterback.
Yeah. A couple Dak Prescott was sacked on his first 3 dropbacks against the Rams, and he just lit it up, which was kind of interesting.
That guy Aaron Donald, by the way, he
Yeah,
was pretty good.
he's
And
pretty
it's
good.
funny, it's funny when you watch tape and you see every play. He made Zach Martin look bad a number of times in that game.
I know. It's almost like we take him for granted at this point.
Yeah.
Like he's like Mahomes, where Mahomes has to throw for 800 yards, and we just go, "Oh, what a bum! He must be injured or something." One and I don't have any. I haven't watched the Eagles enough. It's just what I observed with broadcast and tape. It seemed like last year they had their run concepts and their passing concepts, and the thing that tied it all together so well was sort of the QB run game. Is it more segmented, if you know what I mean, this season?
They're not doing that as much this year. I think they're conscious of not having Hurts run as much. Maybe
Right.
Hurts is aware of it as well, but they're not doing that as much this year, no question. Um,
Okay.
but you mentioned Dak Prescott. The last 2 games, the Chargers and this week against the Rams, were his 2 best games of the season.
Yep.
A couple of things stood out. Number one, he's throwing with great confidence. You can see him making difficult, tight window throws and feeling good about turning it loose. And I think that's important for him because obviously he's thrown picks in the past, and sometimes that can make a quarterback a little gun shy. He's been very aggressive, making difficult throws. The other thing the last 2 weeks, he's moved well. He's made second reaction movement plays.
And he's
And
running.
yeah, I don't think that's his game necessarily, but he's done it, and then it does become a little bit of a factor.
Our final game to talk about is Bills at Bengals, and a couple of things here. In the first 7 weeks of the season, the Bills went no huddle on 9% of their snaps, which ranks 17th.
Against the Bengals, I bet it went up, probably by a wide margin.
Against the Buccaneers last Sunday, they were no huddle on 28%
Yeah.
of their snaps, fourth most in the league for week 8. Allen completed 10 of 13 passes for 82 yards and 41 air yards on a no huddle. So not a lot of explosive plays, but it seemed to give the Bills the tie together plays they need to better sustain drives. His average time to throw was 2.36 seconds in this game, which is more what you expect from like the Dolphins. In weeks
Which
1
is
through
for
7,
Josh Allen. I mean, that was all intentional. They wanted to develop a rhythm passing game. Look, I think everybody knows that they need to do that. Allen can make special plays. Allen, though, at his core, is not a refined, nuanced timing player. You've got to build that into what you do. He's a obviously as good a second reaction player as there is in the league and can make those absolutely special plays doing that. But you just can't live on that. So you've got to build into your offense timing and rhythm, and you have to do that schematically. And I thought they did a great job of that in that game against the Bucs, both going to the no huddle, because what is one thing that no huddle does, as you know, Doug? No huddle kind of shrinks the defensive menu in terms of
Forces your
what they
defense
can
to be
do.
static when it doesn't want to be.
Right. So therefore you know what you're going to get from a coverage perspective, and then you can act accordingly, and therefore the quarterback can play with more timing, more rhythm, and be more decisive turning it loose.
Well, in weeks 1 through 7, his average time to throw was 2.84 seconds on his dropbacks. Last week it was 2.36. That's half a second, but a half a second, as you know well, Greg, is an eternity.
In the NFL, that's about 5 years.
And he had a 13% pressure rate, which is the lowest of his career of any game. So,
well, it all goes together, Doug, as you know.
It does. So spin that to the other side. We haven't talked about. I keep threatening to talk about the Bengals defense under Lou Anarumo, and darn it, we're going to do it now.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
Well, they're an interesting defense because at its heart, it's a stack box defense, a lot of single high. It's more zone than man.
They play a lot of single high. Yep.
Yeah, he's almost like the anti-Fangio in that regard, and it works. There are openings to exploit against those single high coverage, but Anarumo's defenders are so smart. They're so assignment correct. The picture before the snap is rarely the picture after the snap, and that messes with a lot of quarterbacks. I specifically, Brock Purdy's second interception against the Bengals was actually against quarters, and linebacker Logan Wilson did a nice job of dropping as the middle hole defender as Kittle, I think it was Ayuk, went over. And the 49ers want to test defenses inside the hashes in the passing game, and Uncle Lou had the answers for that. So the Bills are trying to sustain, and the Bengals have a lot of cool ways to sort of break your sustainment, to invent a word that doesn't exist.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what they do, because one thing that Anarumo does a lot of is he goes with 3-man pass rush and 8 in coverage.
Sure.
And, I think that's something that he will do against the Bills and Josh Allen, and see if Allen can work through that extra underneath defender. Because that extra underneath defender, can be a problem.
And they're very good at disrupting the first read with, this guy's here, and why is he now in the flat? That's my read. What the heck? They're very good at that. Every defense wants to do that, but they're very good at it.
So we'll see. I mean, this is a very intriguing game. And of course, Burrow last week, he was very efficient. The ball came out. He's been.
We've all seen the play where he got out of the pocket. We've said he's the best pocket mover in the league, but where he stiffed arm Nick Bosa and got out like 3.
Yeah, that was a little different. That was, that kind of thing's not going to happen every week. But
I know, but it was
first down passing the last 3 weeks. Burrow and the Bengals have been ridiculously good. If I'm not mistaken, Burrow on first down in the last 3 games is 43 for 52, and then the numbers are off the charts. They are throwing the ball incredibly well on first down.
Well, when we put this up tomorrow morning, we will get those stats and pass them along to our viewers and readers. As always, viewers and readers, thank you for observing what we do. And Greg, awesome week 9. I'm so excited for this. And it starts.
Yeah, this should be a good week. There's a number of really big games.
Great stuff, my friend. And we'll talk some more X's and O's next week.
Thanks, Doug.